Our tonight's speaker is Tony DiGeralamo, and he's a man of many things here. He's an author, a screenwriter, he's a comic book writer, game designer, comedian, and historian. You can't tell stories and do this kind of stuff without knowing history too. And he's worked on Simpsons comics, written jokes for late night TV, as it says, been screenwriter for Space Ghosts, and been a blogger for Comedy Central. So he's got quite a background, and his specialty is, as you can see, all of the, just about every book here, or at least 80% of them, I suspect has either Piney or something Jersey on it. And all these books are for sale. You may have seen them set up at some of the events in the area. And so tonight, though, he's going to tell us about a lot of the legends and stories of the Pinelands, and really get into a couple of when I was writing your thing here on the Headless Pirate and the Woman in White, and then the Black Dog thing, I hadn't heard any of that yet, so I'm a newbie, so please educate me. So with that, without any further ado, Tony, let's give it a whirl.
All right.
If you don't, go ahead and use it. If it gets in the way, just we'll see if everybody can hear you.
Okay. How y'all doing?
Good.
All right. Do we have any fans of the Jersey Devil here tonight?
Yeah.
Yes. Good. I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about the Jersey Devil. I do the Pineys. It's about a family of hunters that hunt the kin of the Jersey Devil. But before I tell you about my books, I'm going to tell you about old JD and everything you need to know to survive in the Pines. Because you guys know. It's great to be here at the Hammonton Historical Society, because I do talks around South Jersey and tell people about historical stuff sometimes. But you guys already know things about Hammonton, so that's great. You guys know the original name of Hammonton was? Hammontown, yes. And who was it named after?
Coffin? Somebody called.
Right, it was his middle name.
Right.
Hammond was his middle name, and his brother's middle name was? Winslow.
Ah.
All right.
Winslow. And so you could check me on some of my history, because sometimes you do a lot of research and there's a lot of confusing stuff on the internet. Don't believe it all. Anyhow, does everybody here know the origin of the Jersey Devil? Anybody raise your hand if you're from out of state or something? You're kind of shaky on it. All right, let's go over the basic story of the Jersey Devil. The very basic legend goes something like this. In the 1730s, there was a woman named Leeds, and she lived in Leeds Point, New Jersey, right across from Smithville. And on a windswept night, she gave birth to her 13th child. Now, she was the 13th child in her family, and when she gave birth to the 13th child in her family, she cried out, "Curse this child, let the devil take it." And thus the Jersey Devil was born. A horrible monster that ate the family, flew out the chimney, and has been haunting the Pine Barrens ever since. And that's kind of your basic story. And then there are many variations on that story. If you read the book Jersey Devil by McCloy and Miller from 1974, you can see all the different variations on the story. In one version of the story, the baby is born normal and then transforms into a monster. In one version of the story, Mother Leeds goes out back into her yard every morning, and the Jersey Devil perches up on the fence and she feeds it. And she did that every day for her entire life until she died. And then on the day she died, the Jersey Devil showed up for his breakfast, and no one came out, and then the servants saw it, and they went outside and they shooed it away. And it went screaming into the woods. And so they say the scream you hear in the Pine Barrens is the Jersey Devil screaming for its long-lost mother. Very sad, very sad. Another version of the story, there was a colonial woman who had an affair with a British soldier, and thus the Jersey Devil was born out of that. In another version, there was a gypsy curse involved. That's a very common trope. And another version, it's a weird one, there was a guy in Vienna, New Jersey, who every year, starting sometime in the 1850s, he had a Halloween party and he would dress as a devil and tell the story, which may or may not be true. But there are all sorts of variations. Sometimes it's not Mrs. Leeds or Mother Leeds. Sometimes it's Jane Johnson Leeds of Mullica River. Sometimes it's Mrs. Shords of Pleasantville. And sometimes it's different towns. There's Paulsboro, Columbus, New Jersey, and the Columbus Inn, Estiville, Dorothy, New Jersey. A lot of South Jersey towns lay claim to the legend of the Jersey Devil, the birthplace of the Jersey Devil. But of course, the most accepted place is Leeds Point. And if you go to Leeds Point, right across from Smithville, and you ask them, hey, where's the Jersey Devil? They'll say, not another one. I always tell them they should have like a bus that goes from Smithville and gives a tour. And they go, no, we don't want to encourage this at all. A lot of drunken college students go out there looking for the Jersey Devil. Yeah, JD is sometimes the 13th child. Sometimes he's the 6th of the 6th of the 6th. Sometimes he's the 7th of the 7th. Sometimes the number changes, the place, the woman, the circumstances. It's folklore, and it changes depending on who tells you the story. But what you have to understand is there are three major factors in the actual origin of the Jersey Devil. The number one factor is what New Jersey was like in the 1700s. This is what it was like. You got the map there. We were not New Jersey. We were the province of East and West Jersey. First, New Jersey was settled by, you guys are historians, do you know? Who settled New Jersey first?
Swedes.
The Swedes. After Lenny Lenape, the Swedes came in, and then the Dutch, and then the English. And this map is mostly accurate. It changes depending on which group of people you get the map from. But you can see the dividing line there. Everything north of the line is East Jersey. Everything south of the line is West Jersey. And just so you can remember, see, everything north of the line, Taylor ham. Everything south of the line, pork roll. Okay? And even back then, there was no Central Jersey. So now we know. Now we have the historical context for that. But at this time, the king, the time of the birth of the Jersey Devil, the king ran everything, right? And the Leeds family, the patriarch, was Daniel Leeds, and he was the representative of the king, right? You needed permission, everything from the king to do whatever you wanted to do. Whether it was hunting, whether it was to open a business, whether it was the farm, you had to in some way get permission of the king. Daniel Leeds facilitated that for the British Empire. He'd fill out the paperwork and say, here, go nuts. And you'd go out in the pines, and maybe Daniel would give you a good plot of land, but it was the pines, so you might just get a lot of sand where all you can grow is pine cones, right? And it's really not going to feed your family, so you might be a little resentful of the Leeds. And people were. They were naturally resentful of people who had more wealth and power. And Leeds had wealth and power. The whole family did. So you may have gotten a lot of resentment. People would gather in taverns, and a big loudmouth like me would get up and start telling stories. They may not have exactly been true. And whisper down the lane, you get the legend of the Jersey Devil. But there was more to it than that. There was one of our founding fathers who played a huge role in the tale of the Jersey Devil, and it was Ben Franklin. Now, you guys, being historians, you probably already knew this, but Franklin was a figure in colonial America long before the Revolution, and he basically saw an opportunity, and his opportunity was to sell almanacs. The Leeds family already had a great almanac. It was called the Leeds Family Almanac, and they ran the show in almanac business. But Ben had a new almanac called Poor Richard's Almanac that nobody was reading quite yet. But he started this rivalry with the Leeds. Titan Leeds was the publisher by that point, the son of Daniel. And Franklin announced that Titan had died. And he announced his day, the day of his death, and the year. And then Titan wasn't dead. And people said, Franklin, Titan's not dead. He says, oh, no, he's dead. It's his ghost that's writing the almanac. You don't want to read that almanac. You want to read wholesome, Poor Richard's almanac. That almanac has witchcraft. I hear it has astrology. Don't read it. Read Poor Richard's almanac. That's wholesome. That's good stuff. And that's what he did. He smeared the Leeds. And at the same time, the Leeds family, well, they had a falling out with the Quakers. And you guys being historians also know that the Quakers were big players in colonial America. If you had a falling out with the Quakers, you were in trouble. Daniel Leeds had some controversial opinions about theology, and he wrote books on the subject. They didn't like it. In fact, I did a talk at the Crosswicks Library, and they told me all the trouble started when Leeds lived in Crosswicks, and which prompted him to move down to Leeds Point and found Leeds Point and get away from all the controversy near the Quakers there. So on the road, I'm learning stuff. It was pretty cool. And so the Leeds set up shop in Leeds Point and in the surrounding area. And Daniel still has his controversial views. Franklin is saying all kinds of crazy stuff. Here it is, him predicting Titan Leeds' death in Poor Richard's almanac. Titan also made kind of a crucial mistake. He decided to put the family logo on the Leeds family almanac, and that looked like a little dragon. You can see right there. See, that's Titan Leeds there. And that little dragon's kind of like a prototype of the Jersey Devil, right? So you got all these rumors floating around. Whisper down the lane, you might get the legend of the Jersey Devil. But there is a third factor, real historical evidence. The writers of the Jersey Devil book, McCloy and Miller, I met Miller before he died, and I asked him if there was any real historical evidence. He said yes. They had traced one of the branches of the Leeds family to Deborah and Japhet Leeds. They lived on Moss Mill Road, right across from Smithville, and they had a family Bible. And you guys probably know back then, this is how people did genealogy, right? You put your family and all your relatives in there. So they got a hold of Deborah and Japhet's Bible, and it lists 12 children and a 13th space that's blank. So what was the 13th space? Well, might have been they intended to have a 13th child, never wrote a name there, didn't have one. They may have had a child die in childbirth. This was very common in the 1700s. But their theory is they did have a 13th child, but it was severely handicapped. And what would people in the 1700s say? At that time, they would have said, that child's touched by the devil. This could have been a family scandal. They might have been afraid to write the child's name in the family Bible because it would have been considered blasphemy. They would have been afraid to bring it to church to be baptized. That would have been a bigger scandal. And so their theory is they hid the child in the house, servants talked, these rumors spread, combined with the natural resentment toward the Leeds, and Ben Franklin relentlessly smearing them, whispered down the lane, you get the legend of the Jersey Devil. But they didn't call it the Jersey Devil back then. They called it, does anybody know? The Leeds Devil. It was the Leeds Devil for about 170 years or so. And that's what they called it. This is Deborah and Japhet Leeds' house. It's no longer on Moss Mill Road, but it lasted long enough to get a picture of it. This is another alleged version of the house. Different versions of the Jersey Devil house show up every once in a while. Usually when somebody in Leeds Point has an old shed that somebody discovers and says, oh my God, this is the Jersey Devil house. I'm gonna take a souvenir. And then over the next 20 years, they take pieces of it until it disappears, and then they find a different house or a shed. But in 1909, everything changed. And we get a completely different version of the legend, so to speak. There was a man named Norman Jeffries, and he ran the 9th and Arch Street Museum in Philadelphia. And the 9th and Arch Street Museum was kind of like a freak show for businessmen at the time. So you would go there with your bowler hat and your cigar and your mutton chop sideburns. And for a dime, you'd see, boa constrictors, bearded ladies, women playing basketball, Yeah, it was 1909. This is what they did. So he needed a new act. The museum was falling on hard times. So he's in a bookstore on Market Street, and he finds a book that talks about the Leeds devil, and he goes, this is going to be my new act. So he grabs one of his carny assistants, and he says, hey, take this letter I wrote, go to South Jersey and mail it to the newspapers. And the letter said something like, I'm a New Jersey housewife, and my husband went to the barn, and he was accosted by the Leeds devil. It's terrible. So the papers get this, and they're looking at it. Now, you have to understand, 1909, the newspaper guys were elitist. These were college-educated men. They looked down upon the people of South Jersey. They looked very much down on us, because they had college education, and most people in South Jersey, well, we were just a bunch of farmers wearing overalls, and they made it worse. They said, oh, you're a bunch of hillbillies, you're a bunch of rubes, ignorant, you're a bunch of Pineys. And that's where the term came from. It was originally this derogatory term for people in South Jersey. Later, it became a term of endearment, but back then it was like, oh, you ignorant Pineys, you know nothing. We are in the newspaper business, we know everything. So when they get this letter, they don't say, hey, this is interesting. They say, oh, let's make fools of these Pineys and their crazy superstition. So they published the letter. And instantly it went viral for 1909. Everybody started talking about the Leeds devil still. So people start buying newspapers, and the other newspapers go, why are these guys selling so many more newspapers than us? Oh, they're starting to talk about this Leeds devil thing. Let's do a story about that. And so they did. So they called it the What Is It of South Jersey. They called it the Leeds devil, of course. Another sighting in Burlington. And eventually, in 1909, in the Trenton Tribune, they called it the Jersey Devil. You know, it's like how reporters got to say things over and over again, but they want to change up the words so the article still sounds interesting. This is the one that stuck. And these headlines are from the Rick Grass blog. You can find it online. He's got a lot of good headlines from that era. And so everybody starts seeing the Jersey Devil because all the newspapers won't stop talking about it. So there was a couple of guys in Gibbstown, and the Jersey Jabberwock. That was another one too. They started doing illustrations. There was a guy in Gibbstown, he saw it on top of his shed. They called the cops. There was a police chief in Camden. He claimed to have shot at it. Then there was a trolley full of people, and they were on a trolley car in Camden. They claimed that it was on the tracks, got spooked, flew up into the wires, and exploded. It was probably a whooping crane, but everybody was wound up about the Jersey Devil. Another thing that was going on, and this was January in 1909, so it was very cold. Not like now. There was actual snow on the ground. So there was a guy burglarizing houses, and what he would do to case your house is he took boards, he nailed horseshoes to them and tied them to his feet. So when he walked around your property, all he left were horseshoe tracks in the snow. And this is 1909, very common. Nobody looked at these horseshoe tracks twice, except everybody was wound up about the Jersey Devil. People spotted the tracks and went, oh my God, there's a 2-footed cloven creature looking in my window. The Jersey Devil was here, call the cops. If you were a businessman at that time, you might go out in your Victorian garb that your wife worked very hard to make nice, and you might go out drinking and carousing with your friends, and then your wife would give you the business. So one of these guys comes home one night after carousing and drinking, and his wife says, were you out carousing and drinking? No, honey. I was coming out of church. I was accosted by the Jersey Devil. Call the cops. And so the legend just kept growing and growing. Eventually, the newspapers kept feeding into it. They formed vigilante committees to hunt the thing. The newspaper said, write another article. Ask a scientist what this is. So they asked the scientist, what is the Jersey Devil? Well, as a scientist in 1909, I can tell you that the Jersey Devil is a pterodactyl that has been frozen in ice and has thawed out and is accosting these poor Pineys. No, said another scientist, that is bunk. This Jersey Devil is a giant typhoid germ that has flown here from Mars. That is the Jersey Devil, that is science. And on it went. It was absolute hysteria. People kept seeing the Jersey Devil everywhere. They saw it in South Jersey, North Jersey, Philadelphia, Western Pennsylvania, as far away as Texas, people were seeing the Jersey Devil. Back to Norman. Norman was getting worried that he might get arrested. So he decided to stage a capture of the Jersey Devil to calm everybody down. So naturally, he rented a kangaroo. So he got the kangaroo and he brought it to Fairmount Park and they painted it green. It licked off all the paint, nearly died, but it survived. Then he tied wings to its back, horns to its head, set it loose in the park, and him and the carnies caught the Jersey Devil. They tied it to a tree. I don't have a picture. It's in the archive. I wish I had gotten a copy of it. But it's this poor kangaroo tied to a tree and the carnies standing around like they did something. And so in the same newspapers that ginned up all this hysteria said, the Jersey Devil has been caught. A living dragon has been captured. You can sleep safe at night, folks. The Jersey Devil has been caught. And you can see him live this Saturday at the 9th and Art Street Museum. The Leeds Devil, a living dragon. And this is the actual ad Norman ran. And he got an illustrator, and you can see that it kind of looks like the little dragon that's on Daniel Leeds' almanac. It kind of looks like a kangaroo if you put wings and horns on it. It looks like the Jersey Devil. And this illustration is kind of the main one that's been copied again and again and again. Now there are others, and I showed you those before, but this is kind of the main one, right? And each time somebody copies it, it gets bigger and crazier. And that's why this illustration here is from the 1920s, and why we know all this information about Norman. He gave this exclusive interview to the Philadelphia Record. Everything that I just told you is in this article. And you can see the illustration is already getting completely out of control. So within 20 years, this was the illustration for the Jersey Devil. And that's why we have well, this is from the 1950s. They had a hysteria there. The Jersey Devil was in the woods, and a circus offered a $100,000 reward for capture of the Jersey Devil, dead or alive, and everybody ran out into the pines, so they had to put that sign up. But that's why we have your Jersey Devil hockey team. Oops. We've got
The Jersey Devil.
The Jersey Devil roller coaster. We've got Jersey Devil Marina, Jersey Devil Port, Jersey Devil mini golf, Jersey Devil chocolates, and eventually my comic book, The Jersey Devil. Everything in South Jersey is Jersey Devil. And it's all probably because of Ben Franklin, and then a couple hundred years later, Norman Jeffries. And that's how the folk tale goes, right? You guys have all probably heard your own version of the Jersey Devil going, well, he's got most of it right, but there's a couple of details my father told me was different around the campfire. That's because, you know, folk tales, they get told again and again, and they change just a little bit, just a little bit. And it's not just about the Jersey Devil, it's also about other folk tales in South Jersey, which I'm going to talk about. Now, does anybody have any questions about the Jersey Devil first before I move on? Okay.
Was anybody ever mistakenly, injured badly or shot or killed over all these searches for the Jersey Devil?
Not that I'm aware of. The only things that seemed to get injured were, if they found injured animals. Sometimes they would attribute to the attacks to the Jersey Devil. So in 1980, there were some guys on mini bikes, and they were out. Oh, there's my tag. They were out on a run near Batstow, and they found these pigs, and it looked like something had landed on their backs with claws and eaten out their brains. And it just ate their brains, and it left the bodies behind. So they attributed that to the Jersey Devil. They camped out that night, they heard screams, they said, oh, it's the Jersey Devil, and then they left. But other than that, no, I don't think anyone's been killed over the Jersey Devil that I'm aware of, unless somebody died on the roller coaster that I'm unaware of. That's a possibility. Great adventure. Yeah, the runaway train used to run off the tracks like every other year there. Anyhow, but there's all sorts of, there's all sorts of other folk tales in and around the Jersey Devil. So they say that Captain Kidd, the famous pirate, buried his treasure in the Jersey Pinelands and beheaded one of his men so the ghost would guard the treasure. The Headless Pirate, pals around with the Jersey Devil, is one of the tales. Then there's the woman in white. Now we have 3 women in white in South Jersey. This is a very common trope in folk tales. The first woman in white exists on Route 55 in Deptford, which I did book 8 of the Pineys about. Route 55 is also known as Indian Curse Road. And for those of you who don't know, it was built through an Indian burial mound back in the mid-1980s. They were doing an extension off of 42 to the Deptford Mall when malls were still a thing. But they built it through an Indian burial mound. One of the road crew died. Now they say the road is cursed. They say the woman in white is one of the victims of one of the many, many accidents on Route 55. If you've ever ridden 55, you know what I'm talking about, right? It's not a great road. So if you go online, do a search, you can see the woman in white walking along the road. So that's the first woman in white. Then there is the woman in white at the Flanders Hotel in Ocean City.
I remember hearing that.
Her name is Emily, and that's what the restaurant's named after. And she's waiting for her lost love to return. And then there is one in Absecon on the beach there. That is the one they say pals around with the Jersey Devil. She is also waiting for her lost love and looks out over the ocean, waiting for his boat to return, which never will because she's hundreds of years old or whatever. But this is a very common trope in other folk tales. Then, so you got the woman in white and the Headless Pirate palling around with the Jersey Devil. But then there's the black dog. So the black dog is another trope in folk tales. A lot of cultures have the black dog. It's usually a negative spirit, but in South Jersey, it's a positive spirit. The black dog helps you. It will warn you, don't go into the water. That's very dangerous, or it'll, follow you around and, I don't know, protect you. But the black dog, the woman in white, and the Headless Pirate all pal around with the Jersey Devil. So goes the legend. So these are the legends kind of around it. But then there are witches. There are witches definitely in South Jersey folklore. You can read about some of them in a book called Legends, Lores, and Lies by William McMahon. And my favorite one is Peggy Clevenger. Peggy Clevenger was from Pasadena. Pasadena, New Jersey was located where the Terracotta Factory ruins are. Do you guys know where that is? It's kind of near Weymouth, down that way in the Pines. If you go online, do a search, you'll see it. Anyhow, Peggy lived in Pasadena. She was a witch. They sometimes called her the Rabbit Woman because she could turn into a rabbit, she could turn into a lizard, and she could do witchy things. She had an abusive husband named Bill. And then one day Bill said to her, "Peggy, when I get to hell, I'll let you know how hot hell is." So one day, Peggy had enough of his abuse, and she nailed him shut in the house and burned it to the ground. The next day, the well in Pasadena boiled, and that was Bill telling her how hot hell was. They say, if you're walking through the Pine Barrens and you come across the boiling well, you are standing in the ruins of Pasadena. But beware, they also say the Pasadenans never left. They're all inbred albinos and they're crazy, and they'll capture you and make you part of their candy. So these are the tales of South Jersey. There's a lot of ghost towns in the Pines, and I'm sure you guys know that. What's the closest one to here? I think you guys probably know. Hammontol.
Oh, Hammontol.
Hammontol was the one I was thinking of. That one is the most interesting to me because it's named after an explosive, which is what Hammontol was in World War I. It also had a racetrack they built in 1926, I think. It was really hot for a while. People raced jalopies around it, and then it fell out of favor, and now it's just a ruin. I think there's one building from Hammontol that survives. They moved it to Hamilton. The rest are all ruins. You guys probably know where it is, but it's behind Royal Crown Ice Cream, behind 561 in the woods there. It's private property. Be careful if you go, but if you look on Google Maps, you can see the loop of the track. The track's not there, but like the foundation still is if you go back there. So there are tons of towns like that. There's Friendship, that's over near the Cosenza Memorial. If you make a left and go down this road that's near the Cosenza Memorial, it just gets covered by sand and then eventually swallowed by the pines, and if you keep going, you'll hit Friendship. The Cosenza Memorial itself is haunted. They say when Cosenza crashed, the Pineys showed up, to try to save him, but the Jersey Devil had beaten him there and pulled his body out and dragged him all around and left him for dead. They say now if you go to the memorial, and Crisanza's a Mexican hero, by the way. He's considered a huge national hero down there. They have a ceremony every year. But if you go to the memorial, you're supposed to leave an offering to Crisanza in the form of pennies. Otherwise, you'll keep hearing his plane buzzing you. You hear him haunt you. So do the right thing if you go to Crisanza Memorial. Bring some pennies, because you don't want that. You don't want the ghosts following you around. Not like that. There's tons of other ghosts and witches in the Pines. One of my favorite stories is some of the pirates. The pirates are one of my favorites. I'm doing a lot of research in that now. So just about every major pirate made landing here in South Jersey at some point or another during the golden age of piracy. So I mentioned Captain Kidd. There's also another story with him that he had a mistress in Brigantine named Amanda. And before he went back to London, where he was eventually hung, he said to Amanda, "Baby, I'm gonna marry you. I'm coming back, but before I do, I'm gonna bury some treasure with you. So keep an eye on it, and I'll come back and marry you." He never came back. And they say Amanda may or may not have gotten the treasure. It may still be buried in Brigantine somewhere, or maybe along Oyster Creek, is the rumor.
She's not dressed in white, is she?
She's not dressed in white, as far as I know.
All right.
As far as I know. Then there is Blackbeard, the famous pirate. He had headquarters on Petty Island in Pennsauken, New Jersey. And him and Stede Bonnet, the dandy pirate, would congregate there. They may have buried treasure there, or in Burlington, or in Cape May Point. No one's really sure. But they used to get in the longboat, row across the river to Philadelphia and spend their booty. They say they buried, Blackbeard buried his treasure on Wood Street, either in Philadelphia or in Burlington. And while he was burying it underneath a black walnut oak, a crazy Spaniard volunteered to guard the treasure in death and shot himself on the spot. And the crew felt so bad, I guess because he's crazy, they shot his dog and threw him in the hole too, so he'd have company in the afterlife. These are pirates. The weird thing is, up until 1875, there was a massive black walnut oak on Wood Street in Philadelphia, but nobody knows if the treasure was ever found. Ben Franklin wrote in an essay, maybe 50 years after the golden age of piracy, something to the effect of, so many people are looking for pirate treasure in the Philadelphia area to the ruin of their own families. So this was a real thing. People were looking for pirate treasure, and they were bankrupting themselves over it. And so I'll be doing book 14 of the Pineys is going to touch upon a lot of the pirate stuff. There's also the myths of the Lenni Lenape, I always say it wrong. And there's a lot of stories with them, a lot of myths. One that I touch on in book 10 of the Pineys is the Watagami, and they're little wood dwarfs that live in the Pine Barrens, and they're mischievous. They're kind of like gremlins. Sometimes they do nice things. Sometimes they steal stuff from you. Then there's water panthers. These are giant panthers made of water that drag you into the surf and drown you. There are these weird ogre monsters. They've got all kinds of crazy names. They have their own version of the Wendigo, the Skinwalker, which is another indigenous tale. There's not a lot written on the Lenni Lenape because a lot of them moved out of here after a while. They were kind of forced to move into the Pine Barrens for a while. It was sort of an unofficial reservation for them. And they considered the Pine Barrens cursed because they couldn't grow anything. And that was part of the reasons a lot of them all moved out west. Not all, but some. In book 1 of the Pineys, I touch upon the story of the Wallam Olam, which was an ancient book that supposedly the Lenni Lenape wrote, even though they didn't have a written language. And it was to track their story from crossing the Bering Strait into North America, all the way across North America to New Jersey. And the book supposedly had mystic powers, but no one's actually seen the book. except for one guy who translated some of it, he claims. So most people consider it a hoax, but you never know. You never know. If folk tales are always partially true. So maybe it was partially true. Maybe there's somewhere someone hasn't discovered the true Walla Molla. But these are the kinds of things I write about in my books, in the Pineys. Like I said, it's about a family of hunters that hunt the kin of the Jersey Devil. So for instance, in book 9, the opening chapter takes place in 1730 during the Mount Holly witch trials, which happened in 1730, and Ben Franklin was there reporting for the Pennsylvania Gazette at the time. Interesting thing about that too, one of my fans emailed me. She was a Leeds, traced her lineage back, but then she also traced it back to a woman named Elwell, who in 1692 was arrested for witchcraft in New Jersey. And she even had her arrest warrant that she found in the archive and sent me a link, and you could see what she was charged with. She was not tried because they, in her town, ended the witch trials, decided not to do it anymore, and just cut her loose. But Ben Franklin has an account of the 1730 witch trials, and he said it was mostly for show. It was a bunch of nonsense. Not like the Salem ones. He just, he said it was just for show. Just for show. But there's a lot of history in Mount Holly. For those of you who don't know, Mount Holly was founded in 1677. So, super old. And in book 13 of the Pineys, I talk about a tale. There is, up on the mount, in Mount Holly, there's an actual mount, there is a stone altar called the Holy, Holy, Holy. And they say the Jersey Devil's trapped inside. And they also say that they sacrificed witches on the altar and then threw them down a nearby well, which is also up there, called the Witch's Well. And they've since built a building over the Witch's Well because they don't want anybody to fall in, I guess. But they say if you go up and knock on the door of the building, a couple seconds later, you'll get a knock back. So, book 13 of the Pineys is all about that. Book 12 was about Ong's Hat. Do you guys know the story of Ong's Hat? Oh, one of my favorite stories. So Ong's Hat was a town in South Jersey. It doesn't exist anymore. And it was settled by Jacob Ong and the settlers. And when they got there, they said, Jacob, where are we going to build our town? And he took off his hat and threw it in a tree and said, there. And they built the town around the tree. And that's why it's called Ong's Hat. And for about 170 years, it was a village in South Jersey. But then, either in the 1930s or the 1970s, no one's really sure, the last known inhabitant of Ong's Hat mysteriously disappeared. Nobody knows why, but according to the internet, interdimensional portals open up in and around Ong's Hat.
You gotta believe the internet.
Absolutely. In fact, there's a great site called historicalareals.com, and if you go there, what it does is it overlays all the Google Maps, and then when you get previous the year of Google, it gets to aerial maps. So if you go back through time, and they overlay them perfectly, if you go back through time in the Pemberton area where Ong's Hat is, you could see the only known picture that I found of Ong's Hat from the air. It's from 1931, and you could just see tiny little buildings and the words Ong's Hat written across it. And it's located at the beginning of the Batona Trail, which is, for the hikers out there, it's you know what it is. It's a trail, fairly famous trail. And the parking lot for the trail is called the Ong's Hat parking lot. That's exactly where the village used to be. And then also in book 12, I talk about the village of Ancora. Now you guys, being from around here, you know all about Ancora, but do you know the history of Ancora? You probably do. No? All right, I'll tell you. So, Ancora was founded in the 1860s by Dr. George Haskell and the Spiritualists. And these guys were, I'm not making this up, communist psychics. So, they wanted to build a town where everybody shared in on everything, and somehow that worked. And the elites were psychics who could talk to the dead. So, anybody who wasn't a psychic had to do all the work, and then the psychics were just like, oh, I talked to the dead today. Can I have a sandwich? So they built the town, and for about 10 years it kind of existed until it collapsed because communism doesn't work. And then Haskell died, and then the whole thing fell apart. But the village kind of existed for a while. Then in the early 1900s, they built the sanatorium for tuberculosis, and that was called Sunnyrest. The entrance to Sunnyrest still stands. It's this wrought iron gate, and you can see it across from the DMV. You guys know this part, right? Okay. I recently rediscovered, I kind of lost it in the summer because it was all overgrown, and I kept driving down that road going, where the hell is it? I wanted to get a picture. And then finally the winter came, and I got my car inspected, and I was like, there it is. Then they built, at some point, they built a prison farm. I think it was there for about 20 years. And then in 1955, they built a massive complex we know today as Ancora Psychiatric Facility and the Veterans Rest. But there's stories connected to it. So the one story is that in the Veterans Rest, the veterans come out at night and fight in gladiatorial games to the death in the Pine Barrens. So there's that. And then, of course, you guys being local, you know what it's like to get the call, right? You get the call, well, somebody got out of Ancora, you know, watch yourself. And so one night I was over at my parents' place, and they live in Blue Anchor, and my dad got the call, and he answered the phone, and he sat back down to dinner, and we're eating, and he said, oh, Tony, I forgot. I left the axe outside. Yeah. Could you go outside and put the axe away for me? I'm like, Dad, there's an escaped mental patient outside. He's like, yeah, it'll be fine. Just go put the axe away before he gets here. So I did that, but you guys know what it's like. And you think that's funny, but in the 70s, my aunt, who lived in the same house, was coming down her driveway, and two of the patients stopped her. Wow. And she kept the car locked, and she was on the news, and they eventually got discouraged and went away. But unfortunately, they went in the woods, and one killed the other, and the other went back in. It's still a funny story, but not as funny. But anyhow, I always tell that story outside of Hammonton, and it gets a laugh because they're just like, really? You live in, really? It's a crazy place? Yeah, 30-foot tall fence. It's pretty crazy. That's sort of the origins of Ancora and the origin of South Jersey. And these are the stories I think we all grew up with, and that I love to incorporate into my books. So if you have any questions, please. Yes, sir.
Tony, this was great, really fun.
Thank you.
Of course, I'm sleeping with the lights on tonight. But you remember that movie, The 13th Child, Cliff Robertson?
Yes.
Michael Marek was co-author of the screenplay. Is that somebody you just mentioned a little while ago, or writer?
William McMahon is
that's
who I
you
mentioned.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that film?
I've seen parts of it.
You didn't get through it, yeah?
Yeah.
I didn't either.
It's not great.
No, it's awful.
It was shot in.
I hope nobody here was involved in it.
It was shot at the soundstage near Paulsboro.
And part of it, there's one scene from Kessler Hospital, and then there's one scene on Bellevue Avenue. It might have been at Donio House, Jim Donio's house, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure of that.
And then there was a more recent movie, Knock at the Cabin.
I don't know.
It doesn't have anything to do with the Jersey Devil, but part of it supposedly took place in the Pine Barrens, and they shot a couple of scenes in South Jersey.
Okay.
It was the M. Night Shyamalan movie.
Oh,
Route
right.
70.
Route 70, they shot some too.
Oh.
There's an ice cream place.
On 70?
Oh yeah, right there.
Okay. Yeah, and there have been a few movies over the years. They never quite get it. I don't think really anybody does their research in Hollywood. Here, I wanted to show you one more thing. This is my book covers. I wanted to show you that. And more recent book covers. And things have been going really well with the Pineys. Now everybody's reading the Pineys, so it's a lot of fun. One of the books, speaking of pirates, I forgot to tell this story. There were a couple of pirates. One was called Bloody John Bacon. All right, he committed the Long Beach Island Massacre in 1782, and I wrote about him in book 6. What happened was, and you can go up to LBI and you can see the sign, and him and his guys came across some sleeping American sailors who were camped out, and they just started killing them in their sleep. They killed about 18 of them, and there's a big sign up to commemorate the massacre. And it was considered basically a war crime at the time, very dishonorable, killing guys in their sleep. So they hunted him down like a dog. He fought in the last official battle of the American Revolution, which they reenact in the Cedar Bridge Tavern every year. I just went to the reenactment this year. It was pretty cool. He got away. He went back to LBI, and eventually he got cornered in the Rose Tavern by Captain John Stewart just after the war. Bacon went for his musket or his flintlock, and Stewart stabbed him through the heart with a bayonet. They dragged his body through the street, and the villagers were going to bury him in the middle of the road so he wouldn't have a Christian funeral. But his brother begged the crowd for the body, and he said, "My brother was a loyalist like you used to be. Let me give my brother a decent burial." So the crowd relented, and he is buried in Arneytown Cemetery today. And that's now a big veteran cemetery, if you've ever been there. But it has a really old section that predates the Revolutionary War. Crazy. And that's where he's buried. In my book, his brother takes him to a woman who gives him a witch's heart. And Bloody John Bacon comes back to restart the American Revolution. But there have been bandits all through South Jersey. There have been bandits all through South Jersey. Joe Mulliner and the Refugees, they were bandits during the Revolutionary War. He was a gentleman robber, though. Him and his men would go into towns during a dance while the men were up north fighting the war. And they would hold everybody hostage, and he would dance with the ladies, and then they'd rob everybody and leave. So, but another couple of bandits were Fagan and Fenton, and they operated out of Farmingdale. And I was telling this story over at Vinyl Brewing, and the bartender was like, "Oh, my last name's Fenton." And I said, "Well, it's Jacob Fenton." He said, "My brother's name is Jacob." He said, "Not only that, my grandfather told us we were descended from highway bandits." So he is probably a Fenton descendant. They operated out of Farmingdale. They were eventually caught like Joe and the Refugees were when the war ended. And they caught him, and Fenton said, "We have a bunch of treasure back in Farmingdale. Let us go, and we'll give it to you." They said no. He tried to escape, and they shot him dead. So, check out Farmingdale, Cape May, Burlington. These are all places you can find treasure, people. So, and if you do, I want my cut. I mean, it's only fair. It's only fair. But anyhow, if you have any other questions? Yes, sir.
One of the, when you showed the original map, sorry to get serious here, but the West Jersey, Hammonton, if I'm not correct, or if I'm not mistaken, then the line between, Bellevue Avenue, where it turns into 12th Street, that whole area west of Egg Harbor City was a whole nother plot of land. So does that basically cut Hammonton in half?
No.
I don't think so, because
The line
off to
runs
left a little
from
bit, right? There it is.
the southern tip of Long Beach Island, back in the day when they started it, and runs north. It was supposed to end at Port Jervis. There are two lines, because the first attempt in the early 1700s, they didn't allow for declination, and they came out, they hit the Delaware River just north of Trenton. That line is the Burlington Ocean line today, Burlington Ocean County. The correct line they put through later, late 1700s, was monumented every mile, and basically ended up, that was the actual dividing line. Every piece of property in New Jersey is surveyed to that line initially.
Very cool.
That's interesting, because they talk about that, and the reason the roads are kind of lined up and everything, but they say that was part of West Jersey society.
We're solidly in West Jersey. And the West Jersey proprietors still exist, as do the East Jersey proprietors. I met one of the West Jersey proprietors many, many years ago. They meet once a year for lunch, conduct any business that they have to. As late as in the 1980s, the East Jersey proprietors sold a piece of land that was still theirs, that had never been bought by anybody. It was up near Hartshorn Woods in Monmouth County. So.
thank you for saying that the smart way. The only thing I had to add was I've seen like 4 different versions of the map, and sometimes the line is like a little different. Sometimes the line's more like this. It's more like, as you would divide it today. Like I would divide North and South Jersey on like 195, but it depends. Yes, sir.
Did Franklin's son or grandson become governor in New Jersey somewhere?
Yes.
Yeah, that was before the war though.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they did not get along.
Right,
It was
I
his
knew
son.
that, yeah.
It was his
His
son.
son.
He was a loyalist, and he went back to England after the war.
And well, he should. By the way.
Stupid Tory.
Yeah, get him out of here. This is completely off the topic in a way. The 9th and Arch Street Museum, what was it called? The Arch Street
The
Museum?
9th and Arch Street Museum, sometimes the Dime Museum.
Did that ever become something else in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s? I'm from Philly originally.
I think it did. I mean,
Was
the
it
building, I think, is still there.
Was it the Troc Burlesque House?
No.
Okay.
No.
Not that I was ever there. I was not there that night my friend was getting married.
No.
Told you about that.
I-
Yeah, I think it definitely, I've seen a
Either 8th or
few,
9th.
yeah, I've seen a few pictures of this later, and it lasted for a while. I don't think it's there now. I mean, the corner's still there. Part of it might be there. Like, I think the top of it's different now. I'm not sure. But, yeah, it's kind of neat just to even see this picture, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's so far in the past. If you see pictures of Philadelphia at this time, there are wires everywhere because electricity is like brand new, and people are just wiring up their houses and there are no rules, so they're just wires everywhere. And you can even see some in this picture if you look close enough. You can see a bunch of wires here and there. The old timey wires with the glass things on them, which are you can see on the railroad track. Insulators, thank you. People collect them. That's like an eBay thing. I went back there trying to find them all, but apparently somebody went back there and shot them all up over the years. But yeah,
Could be
Yeah.
the Jersey Devil.
perhaps.
Vengeance is mine. Saith the devil. It was at 10th and Arch, I just looked it up.
Oh, okay. Yes, sir.
You mentioned a Mexican pilot. They have
Crisanza.
you said they have an annual thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what date that is by any chance?
Not off the top of my head. I know he crashed in bad weather.
Yeah.
I think.
I
I
wanna
visited,
say
I
it's
visited,
the,
I did for the visit.
Saturday after the 4th of July.
Yes.
Yeah, he was the Mexican Lucky Lindy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
I
that
wanna
penny,
say-
that penny thing is, they said that back home, all the kids donated the pennies to buy the stones to make the monument.
Oh,
Kids in
okay.
Mexico and the United States gave pennies to
Right,
make the
right.
monument.
Ah.
So if you get to the monument, there is a story on there.
They'll say on the story, yes, I read that.
And the monument is Spanish and English.
He's considered Mexican's Lindbergh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Charles Lindbergh.
He was young,
It's from
I
very
think it was like
wealthy
25, 23, something like that, very young, he died.
Yeah, it was a shame because they say it was bad weather and the Mexican government kept pushing him to go back up, and he was literally like flying his plane with a flashlight hanging out the plane because the visibility
Wasn't he
was so
bringing
bad.
food or something across?
I don't think so. I think he was just
trying to.
trying to beat the record.
Oh.
Yeah, right.
1928.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Yes, sir.
The albino people that you were talking about,
Mhm.
what area is that supposed to take place in?
Pasadena.
Which is where?
It's near the Terracotta Factory ruins. If you Google the Terracotta Factory ruins in New Jersey,
I went.
What town is that near?
They say it's pretty bad.
it's
on the
in the
boundary.
woods. It's kind of near Weymouth. Not
Oh,
really.
okay.
No, it's not near Weymouth.
No?
It's north of Route 70,
Oh, okay.
the Jersey Central Railroad.
Okay.
What people refer to as the Pasadena Terracotta Works is actually the Brook Spray Brick Factory, which was built as a state-of-the-art brick factory, never produced a brick because the owner died and it was tied up in litigation for years and years and years, just went to decay. And the story about, the people that disappeared, there was a fire that basically burned down a portion of the factory and the caretaker's house that was there. I know these things because basically that was the east end of the forest that I supervised for 30 years.
Oh, okay.
So I'm well familiar with that spot. I can take you there sometime if you'd like to see the brick factory.
Don't do it.
Nobody there. The
Just
Terracotta Works
Be
was further
careful of the
north.
well. Be careful of the well.
I definitely went to the west.
Little people there.
I don't think the well's an official thing. That's a story. But if you come across one,
I'll be careful.
yeah. Yeah, and then there's the glass works on the Mullica River. Do you guys know about that? So Crawley's Landing used to be Crawley Town, and then Herman City, which is downriver. Those were both glassworks, and John Mason made the first mason jars in South Jersey there, but both of them burned down, the glassworks. And he died penniless because apparently he didn't patent the correct part of the mason jar. He patented the screw top, but he didn't patent the rubber stopper, which actually stopped all the air from getting in. And so they kind of ran amok on his invention. But Crawley's Landing has a bunch of old glass in the sand there. And so one of the guys who goes to Lines in the Pines, which is the big piney con every year in March, at Stockton, he makes jewelry out of the glass there. And he digs it up and polishes it up. And then there's a bunch of piney craft artisans at Lines in the Pines. I highly recommend. I'll be there again this year. And it's got other piney authors, Piney Tribe is there, all the guys. It's the only room I'm usually competing for piney attention. So normally I go to a comic book convention, everybody's like, ooh, Jersey Devil stuff. Nobody has this, and that room is like, everybody's got Jersey Devil stuff. But yeah, highly recommend the Lines in the Pines. I think it's March 10th this year, I want to say, somewhere around that. Any further questions? Yes, sir.
You didn't mention Bigfoot. Was that a myth?
Well, Bigfoot in South Jersey is called the Red Eye. And it's basically the same story, different name. If you go to the Bigfoot of America Watchers, whatever they're called, you look it up online, you could see all the sightings of Bigfoot. They put a little tag on a Jersey map, and like the entire map's covered. Like Bigfoot's literally been in every square foot of this state. So I say a lot of that's confusion with the Jersey Devil, but these guys want to see Bigfoot. I don't know where they get their science from, but the most recent sighting of the Jersey Devil that I'm aware of is 2017. It was a couple in Millville. They were driving along, they saw it on the side of the road. They said it was covered in coarse fur and had black wings, and when they got close and illuminated it with their headlights, it shot into the air and disappeared. And they stopped the car and looked around, but they couldn't find anything. The most recent video of the Jersey Devil, I think is from 2015 or 16. It's at the Pomona Golf Course, and you can see the Jersey Devil flying around. It's a pretty good video. And he looks like a llama with wings and horns. So look that up when you get home. The Woman in White, the Pomona Golf Course, Jersey Devil. These are all fun videos. You'll like them. Yes, sir.
20 years ago in Puerto Rico, there was a chupacabra. I don't know if you heard of that.
Oh, sure.
It looks just like the Jersey Devil. It could be a
Aren't they in
cat.
Texas too?
Or
Maybe they're claimed to be in
I know
Texas.
They come across the
That's the
border.
first thing I thought
It was
of
a
when
big thing
you
there.
said about the pigs that were eaten and the brains were eaten out. That was the first thing I thought of too. And
Yeah, there's there's a cryptid community, so it's all about Chupacabra, Jersey Devil, Bigfoot. There's a few other monsters as well in the mix. Some of them are very, very local. There's a town in, I think it's Columbus, PA. They have their own monster. I never heard of it before. And every year they have a festival, and it's this crazy little monster. It just lives in Columbus, PA. Oh God, I can't think of the name. It has a hard name to pronounce. But yeah, it's just kind of amazing how all this folk tale just, but the Jersey Devil, I think, is the oldest in America, because it's 1735. I don't think anything predates it. Now, people will argue Bigfoot does, because it goes back to indigenous people or whatever, but, it's not the same for them. It's kind of a different thing when they talk about their culture. They're not really talking folk tales. It's kind of, it's myths are different for them. It's part religion, part folk tale, I think. But the folk tale of the Jersey Devil, in terms of cryptids, I think is the oldest. Yes, sir.
No, I didn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So that's what I try to dive into. All the folk tales, all the ghost stories, pirates, you name it. and that's what I do in my books. So any other further questions? Well, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. If you would like to get a signed copy of the Pineys, they're $9. Please stop by at least to get a postcard so you can check me out on Amazon. They all are available on Amazon and Kindle Unlimited. If you have Kindle Unlimited, it's free. So thanks for coming out. Thanks to the Historical Society for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.